Hey guys, it's Celestia, and we need to talk about how fat people are portrayed in art. And not just fat people, pretty much anyone with a body type that isn't skinny but not too skinny, curvy with a perfect hourglass figure, or muscular, because art, particularly in both Western animation and anime, does all of them dirty. From inaccurate and offensive depictions of their bodies that border on caricatures, to the way that those depictions are used to reduce those characters to harmful derogative tropes, there's a lot that's wrong with the way that anyone with a body that doesn't meet impossible beauty standards is often drawn in popular media. So we're gonna talk about it, because I'm just really sick of this being the standard for things. But first, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, where you can learn to draw real bodies right, amongst a million other things, Skillshare. Skillshare, if you somehow don't know, is the largest and, in my opinion, best online learning community with classes on pretty much everything, from illustration to marketing to crocheting those cute little jellyfish I keep seeing. I've personally used Skillshare classes to learn everything I've needed for my career. How to use Procreate when I was just getting started, how to edit videos on Premiere Pro, how to start creating a webcomic, and a multitude of illustration-based classes to improve everything from anatomy to environment design. More recently, I've been struggling with my art style, because it's kind of at a transitional point where it's changing, but I'm not really sure what it's changing to. Thanks to Skillshare, I was able to take Andy J. Pizza's course, Find Your Style, 5 Exercises to Unlock Your Creative Identity, which gave me a lot of really helpful insights into making that transition a lot easier and made me feel more confident in my work and where I want it to go. Skillshare has been instrumental throughout every part of my career, and they have curated collections of courses specifically designed to help you do the same for yours. And today, they're giving you a chance to check those out for free. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And I can't recommend enough that you go click it now, because there is a class for absolutely anyone, including you. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Please go check them out. And now let's get into the video. Now, recently I made another video roasting the worst art tropes in anime, which was a lot more fun than this one, so go watch that first if you want to laugh before we get into the much less funny topic we're discussing today. But then come back here, because in that video I mentioned that one thing people hate a lot as a trope in anime is that every body type is mostly the same, with very little variety in weight amongst the casts of characters. And that's part of a much larger problem that exists in the art of popular media as a whole. And now we're going to talk about how that problem came to be, what makes it a problem at all, the consequences of it, and how we can work towards getting rid of it, or at least lessening its prevalence. Before we do, I just want to say one thing. I'm going to be using the word fat in this video because I don't think it's a bad word. I think the gradually widely accepted belief that it is contributes heavily to the demonization of bigger bodies in media and in society itself, and is inherently based on the belief that fat equals ugly, which is both harmful and untrue, and I don't want to further that. Also, just a quick warning, based on the nature of today's topic, trigger warning for weight-related discussion and brief mentions of eating disorders. Disclaimer aside, this whole problem boils down to two primary and closely related issues. One, the lack of body diversity in most artistic mediums, and two, the fact that weight is used as a way to define and reduce characters to specific, often derogatory tropes. I'll explain how these two go hand in hand later on, but let's address them individually first, starting with the lack of body diversity. It's impossible to look at anime and animation as a whole and not see it. Characters are almost always depicted only as skinny but not too skinny, curvy with a perfect hourglass figure, or muscular to varying degrees. Average chubby or overweight characters are rarely seen in the main cast, and almost never without their weight being a significant part of their identity. Thin characters are rarely defined by being thin, with it being their only real trait, but average and chubby characters constantly talk about being insecure about their weight or wanting to diet, while fat characters often exist only to have their weight be the butt of every joke. And I fully acknowledge that this is the case not just for animation, but for all forms of live action media too. It's a problem everywhere we look. But in the case of TV and movies, the characters on screen are limited, to an extent, by the physical limitations of the human body. A character can't have a body that a real human being can't have in live action media, because a real human being has to play them. Yes, there are other factors to consider in this, like the fact that skinny actors frequently have to starve themselves to achieve the bodies they have during filming, and the fact that muscular actors follow ridiculously rigorous workout regimens and often dehydrate themselves before filming to make sure there's no water weight at all to obscure their muscles. All of which is so upsetting to me and is a massive problem in and of itself. Video editing can also distort their proportions to an extent in post. I'm not saying the bodies that actors have in TV and movies are always realistic, but they're always physically possible for a human being to achieve, even if the ways in which they can be achieved are unbearable for most. In animated media, that's not the case. Every character can have the quote-unquote perfect body if the animator wants them to, and in turn promote beauty standards that no human being alive could ever achieve. Obviously viewers know that, and the onus is still on them to not look at an exaggerated, idealized anime character and expect themselves to be able to look like them, but it's undeniable that many viewers will still look at them and think, well, I at least need to try to get close to that if I want to be attracted. unattractive, and in that way, the lack of body diversity in animated media contributes in a very unique, negative way to the unrealistic beauty standards imposed upon its viewers, often resulting in a significant toll being taken on their body image. But what about the second issue? That weight is used as a way to establish a character as a certain trope. Well, it's hard to ignore. Characters that are excessively thin are usually designed that way so they fit the trope of weak and sickly. Super voluptuous and muscular characters usually have those proportions to make them fit the bimbo/himbo trope. Fat characters, maybe worst and most frequently of all, are almost always designed to be fat in order to fit the trope of a villain, a lazy loser, a geek, or a creep. In reality, all of those characters could fit those tropes without weight being involved, but over time, it has nonetheless become deeply yet unnecessarily integral to them anyway. And that does measurable harm to viewers of that art, because it's only natural to compare yourself to the characters you're seeing. And if your weight is associated with a type of character that's viewed as weak, stupid, lazy, or unattractive, and that's all you see your body type represented as time and time again, it's hard not to let that impact your self-esteem. As some of you may know, I suffer from a chronic illness that caused me to go from a healthy weight to dangerously underweight. And while a new treatment has helped me get back from, like, body shutting down double-digit weight and back to just the upper end of underweight, I spent a long time looking skeletally thin. I still don't look how I want to, as I am still underweight. And constantly seeing characters that look like me only ever being depicted as sick, weak, pitiable, and undesirable does not make me feel good about myself. And when I was a healthy weight, only seeing curvy women with my relative body type having impossibly small waists and no fat anywhere that was quote-unquote unattractive genuinely contributed, in combination with a myriad of other things, to the development of an eating disorder that I'm still fighting. Both ends of the spectrum hurt me, and in no small part because of the normalization of these tropes. Yes, we as viewers can't put all the blame on media for that, but as the article Messages About Physical Attractiveness in Animated Cartoons puts it, the media, in particular television, communicates facts, norms, and values about our social world. For many people, television is the main source of information about critical aspects of their social environment. Whether television shapes or merely maintains beliefs about the world is not as important as its role in a dynamic process that leads to enduring and stable assumptions about the world. So, how are these two issues related? Well, because the lack of body diversity in media is intentional because of those weight-related tropes. Whether we like it or not, attractiveness is a major factor in what gives a character value, both for the viewer and the creator of the media that we're viewing. We as humans are drawn to beauty, and media will naturally reflect that. The same paper I mentioned earlier said the following: "Without a doubt, the animated cartoons studied in conjunction with this research communicated a clear, consistent message with regard to attractiveness. Being attractive is a very good thing. On virtually all dimensions examined, socially desired traits were associated with being attractive, and socially disapproved characteristics were associated with being ordinary looking and or unattractive. For example, our culture values youthfulness over old age, so youths were less likely to be unattractive. As another example, our culture values thinness over being overweight, so overweight characters were more likely to be shown as unattractive, whereas thin characters were more likely to be depicted as good looking. Intelligence is also prized in our society, and, once again, below average intelligence was associated with the less valued group, physically unattractive characters. So if those responsible for creating the art and media that we consume are sure that we only want to cheer on and show interest in attractive characters, that means they're gonna make as many attractive protagonists as they can and shove characters that aren't into side roles, or worse, antagonistic roles. To a degree, this is just an unavoidable inevitability in a society that puts so much value on physical beauty. And while it's not good, it gets a lot worse when we acknowledge that unfortunately, we've collectively come to falsely associate thinness with beauty and fatness with ugliness. So if the creators of animated media deliberately include primarily attractive characters, and being attractive is heavily associated with being thin, it's no surprise at all that we have so little body diversity in the art that we see. And if unattractive characters are deliberately being assigned undesirable traits like lacking moral character, lacking intelligence, lacking social approval, and so on, it's no surprise either that we have so many negative weight-based character tropes. If we could just accept the obvious fact that fat people can be beautiful and thin people can be ugly and beauty isn't tied to weight, we could break this stupid association and have characters of all weights be eligible for protagonist positions, and positive tropes rather than negative ones. If your protagonists have to be attractive, you can make them fat and attractive. It's so easy. The lack of representation and the fact that to fit those negative tropes, fat characters are almost always intended to be depicted as ugly, also means that they often aren't drawn accurately or favorably either. If fat characters aren't drawn often due to the lack of body diversity, artists will be less experienced and skilled at drawing their bodies accurately. If the character is supposed to be ugly because they're fat, they're gonna have only the societally unattractive features of theirs exaggerated to fit that appearance, often in a manner that's completely unrealistic and not even close to how their body would look in reality. It all combines into what we have now. Fat characters usually looking more like like offensive caricatures of their real-life counterparts than anything close to realistic. And yes, I understand that most animated mediums are supposed to be stylized, so some features and proportions are obviously going to be exaggerated. But number one, the fact that there's no middle ground between thin and obese in media means those exaggerations are being consistently taken too far. There should be a middle ground between them, with average and chubby characters too, with weights varying and being exaggerated in a varying manner as a result. As it stands, quote-unquote average characters' weights are often only differentiated by a variation in muscle mass in males and a variation in chest and hip size in females, with little to no fat where they, even as relatively thin, average, or muscular people, would still have it. And number two, you can stylize proportions without doing so unrealistically, inaccurately, and offensively. It's done for other body types. A thin or curvy person can look at a stylized character that is also thin or curvy and think, okay, I obviously don't look like that and couldn't look like that, and this is exaggerated, but that is a model of my body type that's recognizable to me as such. The moment a fat character is depicted as fat, most media just turns them into kind of a blob, which is not at all accurate. So fat people don't get the same kind of representation because artistic interpretations of their body types are not recognizably drawn. Some degree of stylization in art is to be expected, but it should still be obviously and clearly recognizable as a version of its source material. So where does all of this leave us? Obviously, the first thing that needs to change is the perceived societal link between weight and attractiveness, because it's the root of every problem in art when it comes to body diversity and harmful art tropes. As the study I mentioned earlier put it, clearly and not unexpectedly, a strong association was found between cartoon characters' body weight and their purported level of attractiveness. Overweight characters were nearly 3 times as likely as others to be shown as unattractive, whereas thin/underweight characters were nearly twice as likely as others to be depicted as above average in attractiveness. In another published work, we addressed cartoons' messages about body weight and showed that being overweight was a bad thing, whereas being underweight was a good thing. And that's not true. It's not true, and it being spread like that is actively harmful. Given this study is old, and we do have more representation now, but not enough, and I think it's still fairly accurate. We need to draw more fat characters as beautiful to break that false association and fight for and support media that does too. Body positivity is more prevalent and strong now than ever, and while live-action media has at least taken some significant steps towards including more diverse body types in their casting, I personally feel like art and animated media still has a long way to go to catch up in a race that even the current winner is already behind in. And more than just drawing fat characters as attractive in popular media, we also need more diversity in what fat characters actually look like at all. There isn't just one singular type of fat body that exists. It's a scale with varying sizes and varying proportions, which as of right now isn't being regularly or accurately depicted. I think BoJack Horseman actually did a pretty good job with this, having a relatively realistic range of body types and not having any of them directly associated with negative tropes or making bigger characters' identities completely defined by their weight. They approach the whole topic really well too, with characters openly discussing their struggles with their self-esteem regarding their weight, how they're worried about being perceived as a result of it, and so on. Hollyhock, for example, is depicted as a relatively average weight, maybe leaning a little more towards chubby, and she openly talks about how when she compares herself to the vast majority of skinny girls in Hollywood, or Hollywoo to be accurate to the source material, she feels like a blob, even though that's not how she looks at all. It's carefully, tactfully, and relatably handled, and I could sing that show's praises for ages, but the point is that we need more animation like BoJack Horseman, for a multitude of reasons. We need more Hollyhocks. We need underweight fighters, overweight hot girl protagonists, muscular nerds. We need characters that fit tropes without their weight being a part of it. We need to rewrite this narrative. And finally, before you come at me, I'm not saying anyone, be it individual artists or animation studios or anyone in between, has to draw fat characters. People can draw what they want, and it's not right to try to force anyone to draw anything that they're not interested in. I'm not saying they have to find fat characters attractive either. What I am saying is that if people are going to draw fat characters, draw them accurately without turning their bodies into offensive caricatures. I'm saying that if they're gonna include fat characters in their stories, don't use their weight to establish their identities and reduce them to tropes. I'm saying if you're designing a character that's intended to be attractive, don't make their weight the reason that they are. I really do think that things are moving in the right direction in terms of body positivity in art, and I do think that positive change is going to be made in the coming years. It already has been, even if it's nowhere near enough yet, but I think that if we want to see more of it, each of us individually too has to confront our weight-related biases, both conscious and unconscious, to fight back against the harmful and unachievable beauty standards being imposed upon us by this false equivalence of weight and beauty. Media will always make characters suited to what the audience wants to see. Let's show them that we want to see all bodies, not just the ones it says we should idolize. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Hierarchy Kenway, Zelda Deverak 42, and Art of Amethyst Fable, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Alengshi, Kim Yen, Shamil Sheep, Crazy SR, Yen Tong, Grayson Xavier, MG, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Ash W, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, and Milshio for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.